Okay, so the presentation is going to be a little bit different to what was in the abstract because for obvious reasons, what's happened over the last 18 months kind of got in the way of what I was hoping to be able to achieve, which was to interact with practitioners in the field, exploring in a bit more detail some work that I've been looking at over the last few years. So what I'm going to do instead is represent some of that, the foundational thinking behind the notion of professional love and community development, and try and relate it a little bit to the themes that we've covered in the conference so far. So essentially what I'm trying to emphasize is that notion that community development is about engaging with the soil and soul of the community. Fia van der Walt writes some really interesting work around the wounding of communities, as she characterizes it. And I think when we're talking about resilient communities as we are today, we're talking about communities that have been oppressed, marginalized, excluded, and effectively wounded, and the role of community development is to engage with those communities to address that wounding. So these are a whole range of different images around practice, which I would have liked to have included more discussion about practice. So let's touch on some of the kind of fundamentals of what to me is community development all around. So fundamentally, it's a humanistic form of practice. Freire talks about this. A love of humanity should underpin all our work. This can be characterized as being concerned about dignity, the dignity of the individual, and the fulfillment of their lives. And I think the previous presentation really flags that up, intervening with the purpose to enhance the outcomes that individuals' lives offer them. If we think about practice as a humanistic approach, then we're accepting and looking for and building on the goodness within humans. And again, some of the other presentations have emphasized the notions of cooperation and self-actualization. I was in a workshop this morning where it was slightly controversial, but looking at needs, trying to assess and identify people's needs, and that the idea from Maslow of working towards the individual having the wherewithal to be a self-actualizing human, to achieve the goals that they set for themselves and meet their aspirations. Development of the common good, sustainability and spirituality. These are angles which I think in a lot of our conversations we skip over. So in a climate emergency, sustainability, which used to feature as one of the central underpinning principles of community development in the UK, has kind of disappeared from the narrative. And issues of spirituality are things that we tend to skirt around, I think, when actually, if we were dealing with community development as a humanistic form of practice, these would be front and centre. And Freire in particular, how do we achieve a humanistic practice? Well, it's through dialogue, through cooperation, oneness. Dialogue as well for Freire is absolutely central to our work. Now, I've just put a little pause here because increasingly I'm coming across writing about post-human perspectives, and I think as the climate emergency changes the whole context within which we live and practice, we need to think increasingly about a different way. We locate humans front and center in everything, but what's happened by doing that is that other important elements of the sustainability agenda have been allowed to slip off. So there's a new book just come out, Bozilek and Peace, talk about social work perceived through the post-human perspective, and there's elements of that I think can help shape our thinking around community development practice. So again, in terms of resilience, what are we building resilience against? So I kind of characterize this as being hopeful in hopeless times, and drawing from Giroux, Bowman and Freire. where there's a huge sense of uprootedness and hyper-individualization within the neoliberal kind of characterization of economic interactions, the responsibilization of individuals in their response to the situations they find themselves in. So across the globe, there are tumultuous instances of economic collapse, war, ecological disasters resulting in mass migration. And how that is being used by the powerful is to weaponize people's ignorance, and has resulted in the increase in populism and xenophobic policies. And this idea of dehumanizing people and treating them as disposable. So in the UK, for example, refugees and asylum seekers arriving from across the globe, quite often coming across the North Sea in tiny little boats, are referred in the public press in dehumanizing terms as cockroaches, and so that the people living in the country can be fooled into thinking that these are other people.
Sorry, Martin, you have 4 minutes left.
Okay, well, let me go through this quickly then. So hope should be an underpinning philosophy of practice. Frere, Hooks and Daniels also talk about how love should inform that. So if we are addressing all those kind of challenges that we face, rather than weaponizing our vulnerabilities, we can use love to weaponize our battle to reclaim our humanity. And again, from one of this morning's presentation, there was a discussion about the extent to which we should be taking sides. And I think love offers, or the language of love and the practice of that is a way of reclaiming humanity and bringing people back from the brink of believing the arguments about otherness of other human beings. Daniels gives us a kind of a list of elements of practice, which he describes as armed love. Anybody looking at that list of elements would just say that's just good community development practice, and I would agree with that. It requires courage and creative spirit in your work, and I think loving forms of practice does require courage. Drawing from Paige's work, her focus is on younger people. She characterises this notion of professional love, and a key part of this is reciprocity. So actually the relationships are absolutely central to our effective practice with individuals we're working with, individuals and groups, and they must feel, individuals, they must feel love. And I think this comes back to the presentation on absentee parents. If a child doesn't feel love, they're not going to be able to feel a sense of fulfillment in later life. Attachment theory has kind of shown that. So there's some really interesting stuff. I'm not going to insult your intelligence by trying to pronounce these, but the work I wanted to look at the extent to which African ethics could inform Western practice, as well as vice versa. Now, I'm conscious that I'm a white European, and I've got to be very careful about cultural appropriation. So if there are people doing work on this and interested in exploring this collaboratively, I'd be really interested. Van Breda talks about Ubuntu has this paradigmatic numinosity. People like it's very appealing, but one has to proceed with care when trying to utilize other forms of ethics to support your own kind of thinking and practice. But within this, what I've been interested in Ubuntu for about 30 years. There's a deep resonance between some elements of social and cultural practices and communities in sub-Saharan Africa that are replicable, I think, in a professionally loving form of practice. There are challenges. There's some examples here of where perhaps it's open to critique. And like good community development practices, it is up against and fighting against the neoliberalism that kind of prevails. However, there can be no generally global ethic until non-Africans start taking the rich and immensely long-standing ethical heritage of Black African seriously. So I think there is something fundamentally important that we can learn from one another. Contact details, there's references after this. Yesterday, I put this in because yesterday somebody was talking about the dignity of difference, and I think this is at the core of this. And relating that back to Ubuntu, the focus on keys, they highlight the importance of creating space for people to be curious about outsiders. We live in a world where we're
Martin, kindly wrap up your time.
we increasingly perceive outsiders as dangerous and different, and we're made to be fearful of them. And I think there are forms of practice that can rehumanize our approach and response to these challenges. Ubuntu might be part of that. Professional love, I think, definitely is.